Great day in San Francisco to remember Maggie Kuhn and talk about her life from the perspective of three recollectors up here. Each of us, Steve McConnell and Paul Nathanson and I, Carroll, Estes, are going to each say a few words about our connection with Maggie, and then we're going to talk about how she worked to bring about social change, and then some about her legacy, including strengths and, if we can imagine them, some weaknesses, some of which were very endearing. And so I'm going to just start very briefly. And this is a picture of Maggie and me at one of the Gray Panther conventions. And it was an occasion that I would hear from Maggie every 2 years, I think, when they had conventions in Washington, D.C. And she'd say, the program committee left no room for you or Bob Butler, but I'm putting you on the program, and do be prepared for a 10-minute keynote, whatever. So Maggie, she was not one to be toyed with, and we actually got it working. Thank you. She was, as I have written in an article with Elena Portocolone, she was the original radical gerontologist, and in a sense is the mother of critical gerontology as we know it today. And that article, for which I can give you a reference later, yes, right, talks about how Maggie was, so I'm going to begin with a few comments about her radical analysis. And Maggie indeed had a radical analysis, and she was a sociologist dream. And she was an inspiration to all of us who knew her and had that privilege. And she adopted us younger folks. There was a time.
There was a day.
Kids, and I'm 72 now. I think Maggie was probably about 72 when I was lucky enough to meet her and be adopted by her. But she would say how much of a teacher each of us was to her. This, in my view, this was the most. I couldn't understand what did she have to learn from us, because she was a media star when I met her and was very active in the most active phase of the early stages of the Gray Panthers and a lot of media attention and events. Anyway, she was a sociologist by training, and I had occasion last year to go to the university, Case Western, and part of where she had walked the halls as an undergraduate. She never had a graduate degree, but she was in full bloom as a radical gerontologist. And it started with a debate with George Maddox, who was president of the Gerontological Society, and she gave him a Gray Panther t-shirt and proceeded to dress him down as they passed out posters of gerontologists as sharks eating older people, because we were just objectifying them and trivializing them, because we were focused on life satisfaction and psychological happiness, and not on the structural issues of poverty and how youth and age and everybody was related, and everything is related was sort of her sociological analysis. But so she definitely was an inspiration, because she could talk to everyone in words that could be understood. And so she did define, she and Robert Butler, I suppose it's a contest who was first to name ageism, but they were both speaking and and working together about this terrible problem. And so here she's making a statement that old age is nothing to be ashamed about. It's a triumph, something to be proud of. To be old and gray is beautiful. Don't deny your history. Be strengthened by what you've done. Be esteemed as a flowering, not a fading of life. And she talks so much about we're the elders of the tribe, and we have responsibilities. We are charged with the tribe's survival and well-being. And so this was part of the building of the Gray Panthers. So I think I will just stop there.
Yeah, we're just going to introduce each other and then get into the other stuff.
Paul Nathanson.
Thank you.
Another troublemaker.
Yeah. I'm Paul Nathanson, and it's a pleasure to be here. I am the director again after hiatus, Rick Van Winkle hiatus of 30 years of the National Senior Citizens Law Center. I got to know Maggie when I was the first director in 1972. I got to know her in 75, and it became a lovely friendship. I ultimately, in my 30s, was the national secretary of the Gray Panthers, and went to these conventions. Just a couple of stories by way of introduction. Maggie, as you all know, said do something outrageous or say something outrageous every day. She and I did a lot of speaking together. We were in Idaho speaking to the Governor's Conference on Aging. Idaho, fairly conservative audience, large, probably 1,000 people in the arena. The governor was there, and I spoke first, and then Maggie came up and gave me a big kiss. And she looked at the audience and said, "If you haven't kissed a man with a beard, you've never lived." Then, of course, that was just a warm-up, because she looked out into the audience as she was speaking and said, "I see a lot of women out here. Hard to find a man, I know. Why don't you try women?" I don't. Anyway, that was Maggie. And one last quick story in terms of conventions and how, unfortunately, things keep coming around. One of the conventions, when my son Ben I think he was about 6 or 7 years old, he's now 29, she orchestrated some theater, as she was very good at. And, Benjamin Spock, the doctor, which you all know, not the other guy. Benjamin Spock was there, was a good friend of Maggie's, and he came to the annual convention, and we were picketing the White House for national health insurance. You see how well we've done. But the visual that all the newspapers had was Big Ben, who was like 6'4", or 6'5", doctors maybe 6'7", and Little Ben, picketing for national health insurance, always looking for the intergenerational angle. And I would say, and we're going to talk later about legacy, that even Ben is a legacy, and that he's now working for the Senate Democratic Committee on Communication and Policy, actually working on health policy, although unfortunately we don't yet have national health insurance of the type that we were talking about. Maybe we'll get there.